Hey YouTube! This is going to be a pretty personal video. It's not scripted. I'm just going to kind of talk about some of the stuff I've been working through around the shadow side of giving and receiving, and kind of how I think about giving and receiving relationships, being an introvert, setting boundaries, and how these different things kind of have been interacting in my life over time and recently. And my hope is that this is something that other folks will resonate with and find interesting, or that it might help you work through some of your stuff around this. But I wanted to go ahead and post this in December before we get to January, where I'll be doing exclusively tarot videos for a month for the 31 Days of Tarot challenge. So this actually comes out of tarot a little bit, or thinking about tarot, but it's really more just about kind of personal stuff and sorting through some aspects of shadow. If you're not familiar with the concept of shadow as it comes up in magic and spiritual work, it is, I don't have a great definition, honestly, but I'll tell you the way I think of it, and then I would recommend checking out Kellyanne Maddox. Jesse Huntenberg has also done some stuff recently on shadow work. My idea of the shadow is that it is typically something that is formed early in life. You don't necessarily notice as an adult. It might be a belief or something that it's like you believe it to be true, but subconsciously. So it's something that usually gets kind of repressed, or you're trying to push down. You don't want to acknowledge as part of your personality, but part of doing your work is integrating the shadow into your personality. And so for me, one of the aspects of my shadow that I've discovered is this belief that giving or generosity is necessarily painful. And the corollary to that is it's kind of a martyr complex. So it's an idea that no one will ever receive to the degree that I give. I'm an overgenerous person. I am a martyr, something like that. And for me, I think I did a really powerful tarot reading last night where I was working with this aspect of my shadow, and something that I realized was that when I was super young, I was very I love everyone in this room, I wanted to connect with people. I wanted to be generous. I was generous. I was really into giving gifts. I would get these really extravagant, all my allowance saved up, and get my best friend this gift because I wanted to acknowledge our best friendship, and I wanted my friend to acknowledge me and to feel really good about me. And I don't think that at that time I necessarily gave from the standpoint of wanting to receive in kind, but I think I was outpouring all this emotion through giving, and I wanted that emotion to be matched in some way, or I wanted to feel validated by my friends. And over time, I grew kind of cynical because other people weren't necessarily like me, or at least that is the story that I've told myself. Other people weren't necessarily like me, so I grew cynical because I started to have this feeling that oh, well, I'm generous, but nobody is ever gonna return, or nobody is ever gonna be generous to me the way I'm generous to them. Nobody's gonna care about me the way I care about them. And that resulted in, over time, more and more withdrawing and feeling like maturing or growing. That part of it was withdrawing, was connecting less with people, was being less social, was being more solitary, was being able to do everything for myself. Was well, if people aren't going to, give me what I need, then I will become very strong and I will be completely self-sufficient. And some of that is good. So I am an independent person, and I think I have learned a degree of self-sufficiency that is helpful in my life. But I realized when doing this reading, thinking back, that that part of it might have been that not that others weren't giving in return, or not that others weren't giving in general, but that my idea of receiving, or my ideal of what it was to receive, was like so idealized that I was actually pushing it away in order to be the important person, in order to be the most generous person. Like, this is the story I was building up of myself, and to prove that story wrong would fully immerse me in the messiness of relationships and the fact that receiving isn't always a 100% easy or good or positive experience. I started thinking about some of this listening to Lindsay Mack talk about the Empress as a card about receiving. And when I first heard her interpretation in a course of the Empress, I was like, oh, I'm great at receiving. Like, that's not my problem. Like, my problem is that I receive too much and I'm selfish and I'm stingy. Because the story of myself over time that I've built up is like that because I've walled myself off so much in certain ways, I think of myself as a very ungenerous person, as a very self-centered person, as somebody who does not give, as somebody who tends to set boundaries to avoid discomfort. And because I have this story in my head that giving equals pain or suffering, or that giving is difficult and unpleasant, that if I am trying to set boundaries and make myself more comfortable, that I'm becoming like an ungenerous person. So my idea was like, I'm great at receiving because like I can't give for shit, you know. And I had this kind of breakthrough around that where I realized that that's not actually how it works. That not giving doesn't mean that you're receiving necessarily. There's a difference between receiving and separating yourself or avoiding people because you don't want the discomfort of real social interactions. And I think my first instinct on realizing that was to be like, oh, well, you're just really immature and you don't dive into the messiness of human relationships, and you need to grow up and do that. But I've had this kind of cycle before where I'm like, oh, I was just immature and confused, and really I need to dive into love and like have really close relationships where I see somebody all the time. And I think that pattern has taught me that some of my boundaries are totally legitimate. The fact that I don't do the best in a lot of social situations, the fact that I am an introvert, the fact that I don't do well committing tons of time to other people in my life, the fact that like for me time and affection don't match necessarily, so I can really love someone, but I cannot see somebody once a week. That is a lot for me, and that's okay and that's valid, but so it's not necessarily that I'm being immature by not engaging socially in the ways that other people would expect, but I also have to be careful and watchful for where I'm not participating in any kind of exchange, or where I'm writing a story about how I participated in exchange, because it might keep me from engaging in ways that are healthy and comfortable. So I found it really useful to start kind of writing down like, what are things that I'm comfortable giving, that I like doing, that don't feel like a lot of expenditure. And those, because of this story that again, giving equals pain and suffering, I wasn't seeing certain things as generosity or giving because they were easy for me. So financial contributions, gifts, writing for people, providing kind of a gentle and quiet space, providing a space to co-introvert. These are things that I would regularly do, but not necessarily think of as giving. And so I have this story of myself as somebody who doesn't give, but like I do in those ways. The challenge is finding people who receive those things and not feeling imbalanced because the friends that I have, sometimes I think the friends that I have, they might want to receive in a way that I'm not good at giving, and so I like block myself off from that, and it feels very imbalanced because maybe I'm receiving something from them, but there's nothing on their list of receiving that I can give, and so it's trying to divorce myself a little from this like capitalist direct exchange model, but also realizing that like if a friend really needs to receive in a certain way to be happy in a friendship, then maybe like I can't have a close friendship with that person, and that's okay. And so it's some of it is like finding people who really need the things that I can give. Another part of it, I think, is the flip side, or I guess a corollary to the idea that giving is painful. For me, I realized is that I also assume that giving is painful for other people, and so it is harder than I realized to receive, because when somebody does something for me, I have that in my head as like a debt. I have that in my head as they probably didn't like that, and therefore I owe them something. Or if they keep doing that for me and I'm not able to give in ways that feel painful for me, then I'm not participating in exchange. And it's harder to receive when I feel anxiety and like, oh, but like, is this gonna put me on the balance sheet? Maybe I just shouldn't engage with you at all, to avoid that. And so I end up pulling away sometimes, I think, because of those fears. When in fact it might be that I'm providing things like, for example, co-introverting. Maybe that's something somebody really needs. And so the fact that they can spend time with me side by side, side by side, doing things separately, might be like really valuable for that person. And because I don't feel it as giving in the same way, I don't understand that exchange has taken place. But I think writing those things down and then acknowledging like, oh, there's this and there's this, and like being honest with people and asking like, what are the kinds of things you like to receive, the things that make you feel loved. I mean, you can use like the 5 love languages. Mine is gifts, and so I think some of that early childhood stuff has to do with the fact that I was like gift, and I wasn't receiving gifts. It doesn't mean that like everyone in your friend circle needs to have the same love language, but I think like actively seeking out, however that works, I have no idea. I don't know if I put on my OkCupid profile like, here's how I like to give and here's how I like to receive. But when I find those people, like holding those people close, I think it could be like a means of breaking through that story or that cycle. And it does make me laugh because I think like in the Empress podcast episode, a couple episodes back on the Wild Soul podcast, Lindsay said something about, you know, giving is hard, or receiving is hard for everyone, that there is nobody who finds receiving easy. And I was like, damn it, you're right. Like I thought that receiving was really easy for me. I thought that receiving was easy for me because privilege is easy for me. I think that's actually part of what it is I thought because I have a lot of things that I necessarily am good at receiving, but having is not necessarily exactly the same as receiving. I mean, in some ways, sure, I receive a salary from my job, but like, that doesn't feel the same as other kinds of receiving. Because I'm in I've figured out a way to remove a lot of discomfort from my life and put myself in a comfortable place or a safe place. It doesn't necessarily mean that I've learned to receive, just that I maybe learned to provide for myself, or maybe I've learned to receive from myself but not from others. And so I feel the I told you so, not that Lindsay would ever say I told you so, but I can kind of hear that in the back of my head. But you know, it's cool to, in some ways, to realize and to have like a way to move forward with that. So I do think that Empress is going to be a big teacher for me. I did a year ahead spread and got High Priestess as a year card, which I'm like, didn't we just have a High Priestess year? But I got Empress as my greatest teacher, and it's an Empress year in 2019. So I will probably be talking more on this channel about receiving, about the Empress, maybe in this kind of story format, maybe more tarot specific. I would love to hear like your thoughts if you've gone through similar struggles, and if there's anything you'd like to hear about in this vein. You know, I'm happy to provide updates or talk about it, and engage in that way. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe. I would love to have you around the channel. All right, thanks.